Welcome to my class today. Dear students, in my previous class, I discussed the story 3 questions up to the paragraph of the page number 56. But the jar did not give him the spade and continued to dig. 1 hour passed and another. The sun began to sink behind the trees, and the jar at last stuck the spade into the ground and said, I came to you, wise man, for an answer to my questions. If you can give me none, tell me so, and I will return home. Up to this paragraph, I discussed the text, and today, before starting new lessons, I will ask you to go back into the previous class for a while. In the previous class, you listened to me that the jar wanted to take the spade from the hermit. Here, if I want to know the answer from you by questioning you, why did the jar want to take the spade from the hermit? Here it is easy to answer the question. Here the jar came to the hermit in order to get the answer of his 3 questions that had occurred to his mind. And when the jar was before the hermit was digging the ground in front of his heart. You have read it. And here, in order to help the hermit, the jar wanted to take the spade from him by digging the ground. And the jar took the spade, and the hermit thanked him and sat for a while in order to take rest. And the jar had dug 2 beds, and he stopped digging because he wanted to know the answer of his questions. So he repeated the questions in order to get the answers of his questions from the hermit. The hermit did not give him the answer. Though the hermit listened to the jar's questions for the second time, he remained silent. And he stretched out or extended out his hand in order to get the spade from the jar. And he suggested to the jar that he should or he might take the spade for a while, and he also asked him to take rest for a while. But the jar did not give him the spade and continued to dig. Here, in this respect, the jar did not give the hermit the spade. In this way, 1 hour passed and another hour. That is, a couple of hours passed, and the sun was about to set in the west. And the jar at last stuck the spade into the ground and said, I came to you, wise man, for an answer to my questions. If you give me none, tell me so, I will return home. Here, for getting the answers again from the hermit, here stopping his work again, the jar wanted to know whether the hermit would give him the answers to his questions. And if he answered him, then he would return home. Then at this moment, here comes someone running, said the hermit. Let us see who it is. Here comes someone running, said the hermit. The hermit said that there came someone running. Let us see who it is. Here the hermit suggested to the jar that they should see who it was. The jar turned round and saw a bearded man come running out of the wood. Turning round, the jar saw a bearded man come running out of the wood. Saw a bearded man, a man with beard. Turning round, the jar turned round and saw a bearded man come running out of the wood. Here now see, saw is the finite verb in this part. Saw a bearded man come running out of the wood. Here come is used as the bare infinitive. Here saw the bearded man, saw a bearded man to come. Here to is omitted. To come, to is omitted. In this respect, since such type of infinitive form is used as the bare infinitive form. Come running out of the wood. The man held his hands pressed against his hands. The man held his hands pressed against his stomach. Stomach means belly. And blood was flowing from under them. The man who came running out of the wood held his hands. The man who came running out of the wood in this way, at that moment, held his hands pressed against his belly, pressed against his stomach, and blood was flowing from under them. When the jar turned round, he saw a bearded man come running out of the wood. The man who came running out of the wood pressed his hands against his stomach. Why did the man press his hands against his stomach? Here you may guess. The man was wounded. The man who came running out of the wood was wounded in his stomach. And so he pressed his hands. So he held his hands pressed against his stomach. And blood was flowing from under the hands. When he reached the jar, he fell fainting on the ground. When he reached the jar, who is he referred to here? The wounded man is referred to here. He referred to here is the wounded man. The man who came running out of the wood is he referred to here. When he reached the jar, he fell fainting on the ground. He fainted, he got fainted and fell on the ground. Moaning feebly. Moaning means making low murmur of pain. Moaning means making low murmur of pain. Low murmur of pain. Making low murmur of pain. Here moaning is used as the present participle. Moaning feebly. Fell on the ground. Fell fainting on the ground. Moaning feebly. Moaning is used as the present participle. Moaning means making low murmur of pain. The jar and the hermit unfastened the man's clothing. The jar and the hermit, both of them. Both the jar and the hermit unfastened. Unfastened means untied. 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 The man's clothing. What did they say? What did they see? There was a large wound. They saw a large wound in his stomach. After unfastening the man's clothing, the jar and the hermit saw a large wound in his stomach. There was a large wound in his stomach. The jar washed it as best he could. The jar washed it. What is it referred to here? It is the large wound in the stomach of the bearded man. The jar washed it as best he could. That is, the jar could not have washed it in a better way. Here he washed it as best he could. He could not have washed it. He could not have washed the wound in a better way. And bandaged it with his handkerchief, with a towel the hermit had. Bandaged the wound with his handkerchief, and with a towel the hermit had. Here, for the short answer type question, this may be said from the textual part. Whose handkerchief was used in order to bandage the wound of the wounded man? Or whose towel was used in order to bandage the wounded man? In order to bandage the wound of the wounded man. Here the handkerchief, his handkerchief. The handkerchief belonged to the jar. The jar washed it as best he could and bandaged it with his handkerchief. Here his handkerchief refers to the handkerchief of the jar, and with a towel the hermit had. That is, the towel belonged to the hermit. These are the two things, the handkerchief and a towel, which were used in order to bandage the wound of the wounded man. But the blood would not stop flowing, and the jar again and again removed the bandage, soaked with warm blood. But the blood would not stop. Stop means cease. C-E-A-S-E. C-E-A-S-E. Cease. The blood would not cease flowing from under the hands. With a towel and a handkerchief, the jar bandaged the wound of the wounded man. In spite of the wound being bandaged by the jar, blood would not stop or cease flowing. That is, the blood continued flowing from the wound or the injury. And the jar again and again removed the bandage, soaked with warm blood. The bandage was soaked with warm blood flowing from the wound or the injury of the wounded man. But the jar repeatedly removed the bandage, soaked with warm blood, which was soaked with warm blood flowing from the wound or injury, and washed and bandaged the wound. Here, the jar tried his level best in order to stop the blood flowing from the wound or injury. For this, the jar again and again or repeatedly rebandaged the wound with the bandage, rebandaged the wound with the towel and the handkerchief soaked with warm blood, and washed and rebandaged the wound. In this way, the wounded man was being nursed by the jar. When at last the blood ceased flowing, ceased means stopped. Ceased means stopped. When at last the blood ceased flowing, the man revived and asked for something to drink. The man revived. Revived means came back to life. Revived means came back to life. Came back to life. Came back to life. When the man came back to life, after being nursed by the jar, asked something to drink. The jar nursed the wounded man by bandaging the wounds again and again, and in this way the blood at last stopped flowing, and the man revived, got back to his life, came back to his life, and asked something to drink. The jar brought fresh water and gave it to him. The jar brought fresh water or drinkable water and gave it to him. Meanwhile, the sun had set. In the meantime, the sun had set and it had become cool. It had become cool. If I ask you the question, what season is mentioned in the story? What was the season mentioned in the story? Do you have any clue? Here, the jar brought fresh water and gave it to him. Meanwhile, the sun had set and it had become cool. It had become cool. So the jar. Now, come to the next part of the paragraph, and then you will find a clue. What was the season mentioned in the story? So the jar with the hermit's help carried the wounded man into the hut. So the jar with the hermit's help carried the wounded man into the hut. When the sun had set and it had become cool, the hermit helped the jar in order to carry the wounded man into the hut of the hermit, and laid him on the bed. Laid him means put him down on the bed. The jar put the wounded man on the bed after carrying him into the hut of the hermit with the help of the hermit. Lying on the bed, the man closed his eyes. Lying is used here as the present participle. Lying on the bed, the man closed his eyes and was quiet. But the jar was so tired with his work and with the work he had done that he crouched down on the threshold. The jar was very tired with his work and with the work he had done. With his work and the work he had done. That is, the jar walked alone after mounting down from the horse, or after getting off his horse. The jar walked alone, leaving his horse alone. And after reaching the hermit, he was digging the ground. Here, this was the work he had done. What was the work referred to here? The work he had done. The work referred to here was the digging of the ground after reaching the hermit. And he crouched down on the threshold. Threshold means doorstep. Threshold means doorstep. Threshold means doorstep. He crouched down. Crouched down means hunkered down. Hunkered. Hunkered ed, hunkered down. Hunkered down, crouched down on the threshold, on the doorstep. Who crouched down and on the doorstep? The jar crouched down on the doorstep and also fell asleep so soundly, so deeply, that he slept all through the short summer night. All through the short summer night. Summer night. Here, this was the mention of the season. Short summer night. SUMMER. Summer night. Here, this is the page which indicates the season mentioned in the story. I have asked you the question, what was the season mentioned in the story? The season mentioned in the story was the summer season. Here, after putting the wounded man lying on the bed into the heart of the hermit, the jar crouched down on the threshold and fell asleep so deeply that he slept all through the short summer night. That is, he had a sound sleep during the short summer night in this way, by crouching down on the threshold of the hermit's hut. When he awoke in the morning, it was long before he could remember where he was. When he awoke in the morning, awoke again. When he awoke in the morning, who is he referred to here? When he awoke in the morning, who is he referred to here? He referred here was the jar. The jar awoke in the morning. It was long before he could remember where he was. Who was the strange bearded man lying on the bed and gazing intently at him with shining eyes? Here he took a long time to recognize where the jar was. Just after awaking in the morning, the jar took a long time to recognize where he was. For the first time, he awoke in the morning, but it took a long time for him to recognize where he was. Who was the strange bearded man? Strange, unknown bearded man, the man with a beard. Who was the bearded man? Lying on the bed. Who was lying on the bed? Lying is used here as the present participle. On the bed. And gazing. Gazing is also used as the present participle. Lying on the bed and gazing intently at him with shining eyes. Shining eyes means bright eyes. With bright eyes. Bright eyes. The wounded man was lying on the bed. The bearded man was lying on the bed. And lying on the bed, he was gazing intently, looking fixedly with close attention at the jar, with bright eyes, shining eyes. Here, now, in this paragraph, you see, "Forgive me," said the bearded man in a weak voice, when he saw that the jar was awake and was looking at him. The jar was there also. After awaking in the morning, and the bearded man was lying on the bed into the heart of the hermit. And lying on the bed into the hermit, the wounded man was looking fixedly with close attention at the jar. "Forgive me," said the bearded man in a weak voice. Forgive me. Who is the speaker? Or who said this? Forgive me. The bearded man said this. How did he say this? In a weak voice, the bearded man said in a weak voice, when he saw that the jar was awake and was looking at him. What did the bearded man say when he saw that the jar was awake and was looking at him? During this time, the bearded man told him in a weak voice to forgive him. For the first time, he begged forgiveness from the part of the jar. He begged forgiveness. Forgive me. He begged him to forgive him. When he saw that there was the jar awakening, who was awake and was looking at him. I don't know you and have nothing to forgive you for, said the jar. The jar said that he did not know him and had nothing to forgive him for. Here, when the wounded man wanted or begged forgiveness from the jar did not have any intention to forgive him, because he said that he did not know him, he did not know the wounded man, and had nothing to forgive him for. You don't know me, but I know you. You don't know me, but I know you. Though you don't know me, I know you. I am that enemy of yours who swore to revenge himself on you, because you executed his brother and seized his property. Now, here in this respect you see that the wounded man expressed his identity. The wounded man exposed his identity before the jar. He said that though the jar did not know him, he knew him. He said that he was that enemy of his who swore. Swore means promised. Who promised? Who swore means promised. Promised. Who promised to revenge yourself. To revenge himself. Who swore to revenge himself on you. I am that enemy of yours who swore to revenge himself on you. Because revenge, now see, revenge means harm someone in return for something bad done. Take vengeance. Take vengeance. Take vengeance. V-E-N-G-E-A-N-C. Vengeance. V-E-N-G-E-A-N-C. Take vengeance. Harm someone or somebody in return for something done badly. Now, because you executed his brother. Executed means took the life of. Executed means took the life of. Took the life of. Or put to death. Put to death. Put to death. Took the life of or put to death. Who put to death and seized his property. Seized means took hold of. Took hold of. Hold of. Took hold of his property. Seized his property. That is, once, according to the description given by the wounded man, the jar once put his brother to death and seized his property, took hold of his property. Here, the wounded man wanted to express how he was wounded. And before going to give the description how he was wounded, the wounded man gave the description of himself in this way. Here he wanted to disclose his identity before the jar. He said that as the jar once put his brother to death and took hold of his property, he wanted to take revenge, or he wanted to take vengeance on the jar. I knew you had gone alone to see the hermit. The wounded man gave the description in this way. I knew you had gone alone. You had gone alone without any companion. The jar had gone without anybody's companion to see the hermit, to visit the hermit. And I resolved to kill you on your way back. I decided firmly to kill you, to kill the jar. Here the wounded man decided firmly to kill the jar on his way back after visiting the hermit. Here it was the description given in this way by the wounded man. What he wanted to do with the jar, what the wounded man wanted to do with the jar, he gave the description in this way before the jar. I knew you had gone alone to see the hermit. Here the wounded man knew that the hermit had gone to visit the hermit. In order to visit the hermit, the jar is